Hello, everyone. Somehow I've managed to kind of con my way into Francis, your old haunt. So this, you should recognise this, hopefully, as the St Anne's College Library in Oxford, where I'm sure you spent a lot of your time as a young BPhil student here under the tutelage of Margaret Hubbard. So I thought I'd just come here today, if possible, to kind of bring a sense of continuity to proceedings. So basically, what I want to say is this. Many people in the room right now, and of course Frances herself, because I learnt this from and with her, are bound to recognise this age-old rhetorical manoeuvre before I can even rehearse it, but I'm going to have to try it anyway. This subject is a really monumental task, and I'm certainly not equal to it. Of Frances's 42-ish years at the University of Sydney, I was lucky enough to take part in 4 of them. I was privileged to listen to many of her words. She was contractually obliged to suffer through too many of mine. But even the measly fraction of her total career that is my direct experience of it will be impossible to shave into a few minutes. So here's a catalogue of what I won't say, and bear in mind that that's itself a paltry subsection of what I don't know, which together make up the Frances that we all do know. When I started thinking about what Frances has taught me, I found it much more difficult to drum up what she hasn't. It may be rare that we actually sit down and excavate the archaeology of our own intellectual interests. I realised why I personally don't do that much, because I'm confronted with the fact that it all comes from Frances. My short research history thus far sums to nothing more than an attempt to work laboriously through the backlog of interesting questions that sprung up on her watch. My honours thesis was written around Catullus' 64th poem, that strange creation on which Frances ran a stimulating seminar in my second year. My master's thesis grew on the fat of Frances's comments on Ovid's Fasti, part of her popular Myth and Place in Rome course in my honours year. And then I realised I needed to slow down a bit. My PhD thesis actually backtracked to my third year of my undergraduate, in which I heard Frances lecture on her old favourite, the genre of Roman satire. I'm not sure where this inescapable gravity will pull me next. If the motion continues to be retrograde, probably right back where Frances started me off, in the underworld of Aeneid Book 6. God help me. If one's inability to move on from the texts and themes introduced by one's most influential teacher are a pretty solid index of that teacher's influence, then here's another one that I won't talk about. Over the course of my PhD, I had to wander several times to the Mukey corner of the library, mostly to consult her commentary on Horace's second book of satires. Many times my colleagues would hear me moaning about the great example of paper waste that is the classical commentary, often thousands of pages of faux compendious content running over stuff you already knew you never needed to know. But whenever I thumbed to the relevant lemma of Frances' commentary, it unfailingly gave me what I wanted, and without having to hack through any unnecessary undergrowth. If I've shown myself too partial for that to count as objective praise, well, surely that partiality is a form of objective praise in itself. So much has she set the agenda for me that I always find her work useful and interesting. Of course, her teaching never dogmatically formed acolytes. Quite the opposite. It fostered real brash confidence with challenging our elders and making our own classics for our own generation. I just became an acolyte unconsciously, inevitably, and now I admit it freely. Just one last thing I won't mention. Both Frances' teaching and research put out a genuine modesty and brevity, which stands out in today's academic universe, among all the white noise and the verbiage of people who have to be constantly saying something and saying ever more in speech or in print just to survive. Frances taught me that a nice, concise lemma or an acid, sardonic quip were as potent pedagogical weapons as anything in the arsenal. Though she won't believe this for a second if she remembers my swollen essays, she taught me the virtue of quality over quantity, saying much in few words, at least as an ideal which I'm still struggling, literally, even as I speak, to attain. Frances' career features an unusual quantity of such quality. Her modesty rarely wins her the recognition she deserves. Hopefully the toast tonight will atone for that, in part. So here I raise a phantom glass to Frances, and please join me in thanking her for educating not just one, but many generations of Australian classicists. We couldn't have done it without you. And Francis, I actually have a special guest for you in the form of a modern St. Anne's classicist, Professor Matthew Lee.
Francis, we've been filming this from the library of St. Anne's College, from the Classics Room, and it's a great pleasure for me, on behalf of the Classics School at St. Anne's, to pay tribute to one of our most distinguished alumni, somebody who's been a consistently good friend to Classics at St. Anne's over the years, and of course somebody whom our greatest classicist, Mr. Hubbard, regarded as the closest friend in all the world. I can only wish you all a very happy celebration this evening, and to pass on my best wishes and the best wishes of all my colleagues. Thank you very much. Okay, will that do?
That's fine. Thanks, Francis.
Oh, sorry.
And everyone. Bye-bye.
Can you edit